Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the written assignment, which is which you have to hand in April. Which is you have a choice here. You can either write about your linguistic journey or about young learners in the classroom. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the first choice, which is about your linguistic journey. So a linguistic journey is something that we all go on from birth to the current time and then into the future. So you can look at that as you start at one place, maybe where you were born, and you've had all these experiences with language, and you're going forward, and how are you going to use your language as you go forward? So for this essay, we ask you to describe your language learning experiences from childhood till the present, and you might even want to think about the future. As you talk about and describe your experiences, you need to draw on theories of language learning pedagogy and language acquisition to describe your experiences. Because depending on where you are, if you're a baby learning, or you're at school learning, or you're university learning, or you're in um, a, an interaction just with friends, the way you're learning is different in each case. And so what we want you to do in this assignment is to think about that, okay, when I learnt my first language, or my first and second languages, how did I do that? I was only a baby, I don't remember. So what was happening around me, do I think? And then linking that to maybe theories of acquisition. You should consider your personal, educational, societal and contextual influences on how you have learnt, and perhaps how you have not learnt. And you should illustrate these with examples from your own experience. So in class, I think we've spoken about some people having negative experiences when they first started to learn English. So why was that? Why did people feel unhappy and stressed by this experience? How does the educational context in which you're learning affect the way that you learn? If it's an exam-focused society, then you're going to be taught things that can be examined. But if the focus on learning is a language is to communicate, you're going to be learning more with more focus, maybe on speaking and listening. So your family, your educational context, what society wants you to do with your language, these will all have influences on how you learn. And sometimes there's a clash, isn't there, between what the policy wants and what is actually delivered in the school or in the area in which you're learning language. And you should also identify your own strengths. Often we talk about the 4 skills, and this can be a useful construct to organise the latter part of the assignment. So you might think about listening, reading, speaking and writing. And, are you good at all those things in all your languages? Or are you more communicative in some and more academic in others? So you need to give some examples of that. Maybe you can speak some French because you have a French boyfriend, and you have to communicate with him and his family, and friends. So you've learned some French for those situations, but you can't really read or write French very well. Again, that is a result of the purpose of your learning. And you may use diagrams or visuals if they help you to explain your journey. So you might have a timeline, and this is what we're going to go on to talk about now. I think a timeline is a very good way to start. So when you're planning the assignment, you might think, okay, let's look at this in chunks, my life in chunks. What was happening linguistically in each of those chunks? Where was I learning? What kind of learning was I having, how can I link that learning to theories of language acquisition and theories of language teaching pedagogy? So, for example, this might be a timeline or the beginning of one for a student who was born in the south west of China, and they speak Pumi as their first language, because they were brought up by their grandparents, and that's what their grandparents spoke. Um, and then but in that area there's lots of people speaking lots of different languages, so they learned a bit of Mandarin as a lingua franca, or maybe a bit of one of the other minority languages. And what happened in kindergarten, and what were the other learning opportunities? How were languages taught? And then once you get into your primary education, learning becomes a bit more formalized. So did you learn to have to use Mandarin in that context? Where was English in this story? So these are the kinds of things I think would help if you had a language learning story. Or you might prefer to put it into a table. You know, here we've got dates, context, languages, teaching methods, theory of language learning, and other. So at the beginning, I said you could use visuals. So you could introduce photographs or diagrams or tables or maps, whatever you like, to tell your story. So as I said, because this is a master's level assignment, it's not really just okay just to write in a kind of very descriptive way. You also have to introduce some analytical processes into your assignment. So how were you taught? What theories underpin these approaches? What societal, educational, and other contextual realities influenced how you were taught and how you learn? How did you feel about learning languages? Were you motivated? Were you bored? Were you resigned? You just had to do this because it was on the school syllabus? Did often people talk about, in terms of motivation, peaks and troughs, because you know, for a while they're very motivated, they're very interested, and then maybe something else it is more interesting than language learning, and they get more bored with it, and they just sort of trudge along a bit, and then maybe a new teacher comes along or something, and they get all excited again. So did you have this experience? Did you feel your language learning in Mandarin and English and German or whatever it was pretty steady? Or do you feel you had peaks and troughs in your language journey? And it's very important that you give examples from your own experience. So when you were at primary school, what happened to you? How much English or Mandarin did you have, for example? So I think we're interested in both your first language acquisition, your second, your third, your fourth, your fifth, um, any kind of languages that you've picked up along the way. Because most of us, I think, speak bits and pieces now of different languages. So we're not when we say we've got a linguistic repertoire, we say, well, you know, I can speak English fluently. I have good skills in English, maybe. I can read and write some French. Because at school, when I was taught French, it was very much a grammar translation method, and there wasn't anywhere to practice. So we focused on the grammar and the expression, and quite a literary approach. But then I moved to Nigeria, and I had to learn the local language, and that was Hausa. And Hausa was taught to us in a very kind of audiolingual way. We just listened and repeated what the teacher told us. But what was very interesting about that was we memorized it very well. And then as soon as we walked into a village, somebody would greet us in exactly the same way as we'd been taught. So we were able immediately to use our new language. For example, that you know, you'd meet somebody on the street and they'd say Zanuku, you say Zanu, Yawazunu, Yaya Aiki, Aiki Dagodia, Yaya Yala, Yala Lafia, Kalo. These were just like phrases that we learnt. I didn't even know what they meant some of the time, but it did mean that I was able to strike up and be polite, strike up a relationship and be polite with people that I met in the village. And then think about now, what are your language practices at Warwick? Do you draw on your linguistic repertoire according to context, or do you always speak Chinese, or do you always speak English? Do you engage in translanguaging, drawing on different languages to help you make your meanings and to ensure that you are able to be successful in your studies, that you can access the curriculum? Do you struggle in any contexts? Is it easier to write an essay than it is to answer a question in class? Why is that? And going forward, how might you improve your language skills? And also, we want you to think of your language strengths. So maybe strong listening and speaking skills in Pumi, but not as strong as previously. And why is that? Mandarin, fluent and accurate. Four skills, you're good at the four skills, you use Mandarin on a daily basis, you maintain the language. You maybe think your reading and writing skills are stronger than your listening speaking skills in English. Why is that? Maybe you've learned some other bits of language, like I said, some Korean for K-pop, from K-pop, or developing speaking skills in French. So I really want you to think about all these different ways that you learn, and how the theories help you explain how you've learned. So I think this should be a very interesting assignment. There's no kind of right and wrong. The way to do well is to provide a clear journey, to provide details, and to ensure that you are theorising your experiences. Okay, so good luck with that one.